Chapter 76. Probing him for answers. Noticing how the girl beside him was trying to shrink into her seat with her eyes slightly widened, Neil slowed down a bit. He was already used to breaking the speed limit that he always forgot that the person beside him was like a frightened kitten. He shook his head in silent amusement as he watched her from the side of his eyes. His mission in Ivy Grove was already coming to an end, as he had finally discovered when the Doc Roll would be making their next shipment. It was on the day of the school event, which meant his time in the university was coming to an end. He should tell the girl that he wouldn't be needing her to work for him again, but then he thought he would tell her that once she worked for him today and he paid her for it. He normally didn't give a damn about others, but since he had gone ahead and promised her a job, he would allow her to work for a day so he could get to pay not just for the work, but for the dresses he had ruined. He had been so satisfied by ripping the dresses Jason bought for her. He hadn't expected to feel such immense joy from using a sharp pair of scissors to carefully rip the dresses apart and then package them in a box with his little Jack in the Box iron fist. He knew what Jason was trying to do by inviting him to a gathering after annoying him with his damn text message and video. However, he wasn't that stupid to allow some girl in Jason's scheme to ruin his top mission. Though Mia Harrison was his muse and curiosity, she wasn't anything to him to make him ruin his mission by confronting Jason last night. Mia, who sat quietly in the car, glanced at him and noticed his dangerously cold side profile. Despite not being angered, his expression emitted a daunting aura. His determined, sharp jaw was tightly clenched, as if the world owed him something. She quietly stole glances at him, but at that moment, another car recklessly overtook his car, causing him to abruptly hit the brakes, jolting Mia forward. In a reflex, his arm shot towards her, as if trying to shield her from slamming forward. However, his hand accidentally grabbed something soft, causing him to freeze. Mia's eyes widened as she felt his hand against her right breast. She remained motionless for a moment, too shocked to even blink. Before she could gather herself, his hand had already retreated. Nevertheless, she was overcome with embarrassment, her face turning red. She quickly moved away, as if wanting to vanish from the car. What was it with this man and her breasts? She thought, feeling mortified. First, it was his head, and now it was his hand. However, she couldn't scold him this time because he had instinctively moved to protect her from jerking forward and hurting herself, even though she was wearing a seatbelt. The warm sensation of his hand on her chest still lingered, intensifying her desire to disappear. However, she noticed that the man next to her was barely affected by his own actions. He behaved as if touching a girl's chest was normal, and then continued driving. Nevertheless, he muttered curses and accelerated in order to drive alongside the car that had caused him to hit a sudden brake. He rolled down his window and angrily raised his middle finger at the other driver, shouting, "FKU in your great uncle's AE." The other driver, who turned out to be a woman, tried to respond, but he had already sped past her car. Mia stifled a laugh, as she had noticed the other woman's shocked expression before he drove past her, but when he glared at her, she cleared her throat and sat up straight in her seat. She decided to act as if he hadn't just touched her chest moments ago. Acknowledging it would only bring more embarrassment. Therefore, she ignored it and tried to control her flushed expression. Her professor was so volatile that he didn't spare even a woman, whom Mia thought deserved his curse for driving recklessly. She looked at him again. Every time she noticed how tightly his lips and jaw were clenched, she couldn't help but wonder if he had ever genuinely smiled. And for some reason, she looked forward to the day when he would smile or laugh with genuine humor instead of his usual dark laughter. As the silence lingered in the car, Mia gathered her courage and broke the silence. "Thank you," she said with a faint smile. Neil frowned upon hearing her words. He slowed down at the red light before turning toward her, a questioning frown etched on his face. "For what?" he asked, his voice leaving no room for casual conversation. But in his mind, he was thinking, what was she thanking him for? Was she thanking him for touching her soft breast, which had left his palm feeling warm and tingling? Even though his hand had only been there for just a few seconds, he couldn't help but realize she was a handful. No wonder he had felt so comfortable nestling his head against her breasts that day. Had any man ever had the privilege of touching them? Was she a virgin or had some bastard deflowered her? For some reason, he didn't like the thoughts of her being touched by another man. Neil thought to himself, but even with such thoughts in his head, his expression remained indifferent as he looked towards her. Mia continued to explain, seeing his questioning expression, "For talking to Mr. Xavier Galvera about my scholarship. It means a lot." Neil stopped his car at the red light and his frown deepened, skeptical. He inquired, "And what makes you think I did that? How did she even connect Leo Bennett with Xavier Galvera?" Though the two identities were his, and he could tell she didn't know that. However, what he didn't understand was how she connected him to Xavier Galvera in Mirage Mesa. He couldn't afford to let anyone know of his true identity as Xavier nor Neil. Even though he had told James to secure her scholarship, he hadn't thought she would link Leo Bennett to it. In response to his question, Mia reached into her bag, pulled out the personal business card belonging to Xavier Galvera, and held it up. "It fell off your suit jacket yesterday when I was trying to fold it for you. You forgot the jacket at my place," she explained, her eyes meeting his as realization slowly dawned on his face. FK, how could he have forgotten his damn jacket? Stretching out his arm, he snatched away his business card and tucked it inside his pocket without a word. Then he continued to drive as the traffic light had turned green. Mia frowned as she noticed he wasn't going to say anything about Xavier Galvera nor acknowledge her gratitude. She then said, "How did you meet Xavier Galvera? Did you go to Mirage Mesa yesterday to interview him?" She had been dying to know if he had really met Xavier yesterday before coming to her place. How did he even get to fly so quickly from Zen to Mirage Mesa? When he continued to ignore her like he hadn't heard her questions, Mia moved closer and poked his toned arm with her index finger. "Hey, answer me," she urged, not caring that his lips had pressed together into a displeased line. She was just curious to know more about the mysterious man who had helped her and how he had managed to get to meet someone who all the media industry couldn't get a word from. "Is it true that Mr. Galvera is Spanish with an accent in his English?" she asked again while poking his arm. Perhaps it was because she had started to get used to his presence that she no longer felt intimidated or feared his anger. Surely he would answer her if she probed him for an answer. She could even get a few pieces of information about Mr. Galvera and write it down on her school blog. However, Mr. Ice Cube didn't seem like he would give her any answers to her questions. He ignored her and paid no heed to her continuous poking. When Mia thought that he wouldn't speak and gave up poking his arm, she finally heard his deep, smooth voice as he asked, "Where did you learn that Mr. Galvera has an accent?" Mia, who hadn't expected him to speak, smiled upon hearing his question and answered, "I read it online when I searched about him. I also read that he isn't pleasant to the eyes. That is why he doesn't appear on any magazines or cameras. It was also written that whoever took his pictures secretly never lived to see the sunrise." "Is that true?" Neil frowned. Though his late father was Spanish with an accent in his English, his mother wasn't. Thus, Neil had no accent in his English, and if he didn't tell anyone that he was half Spanish, no one would know unless he spoke the language. However, it seemed those nosy paparazzi and media people were writing sh*t about him on the net. When were they going to learn to mind their f***ing business and stay away from his personal life? They were after him as Neil and also Xavier. And this curious kitten beside him, he could tell she was asking about Xavier so she could also make some stupid story about him. Furthermore, how dare they call him unpleasant? "And do you believe everything you read about Mr. Galvera?" he questioned with a dark chuckle as he sharply turned his car into a corner. His car's tire made a sharp scratching sound against the stoned road, which made Mia realize he was displeased about something. She swallowed hard before shaking her head. "No, I don't believe it. Sometimes the media lie to get attention. That's why I'm asking you." "So you're asking me to confirm if it's true before you would make your own story about Mr. Galvera by my word, am I right, Harrison?" Neil asked, turning his head towards her and arching his brows in amusement. Mia nodded her head, "Yes. So tell me what you know about him. That way, I will clear all those lies about him," she remarked in excitement as she fished out her phone to record him while also turning her body to the side in a way she would look at him. However, he burst her bubbles by looking away and coldly saying, "I won't tell you anything." Mia pursed her lips. "Why?" she asked. Was he so greedy he wouldn't share a little information with her? "Because I don't want to. Now stop giving me the childish puppy eyes before I throw you out of my car," he warned calmly as he focused on his driving. He wasn't going to share anything about himself with any journalists. Besides, he was a little annoyed that his real name didn't ring a bell in her memories. Mia glared at him and then decided to stop pestering him about Xavier Galvera. She hadn't only asked him those questions for her blog, but because she felt strangely familiar with the name. Apart from the fact that the Galvaros were famous, she felt as if she personally knew the name from somewhere, but something in her memories kept blocking it away and didn't want her to remember. That was strange, she thought, but then dismissed it as it was impossible for her to even know that man. When Mia noticed that Neil was driving past the junction that led to the local market where she had planned to do some grocery shopping for his house, she quickly shouted, "Please drive that way. I need to get some things from the market." Chapter 77. Took him to the local market. "What the hell, Harrison?" Neil muttered through gritted teeth as he took in the crowd at the local market she had made him subconsciously drive her to. When she had told him to turn into the junction, he had immediately turned his wheels towards it without a second thought. To be honest, he had been curious to know what she wanted to buy at a market. He hadn't realized it was a local market until she made him park his car in a shade far away. They had even walked a short distance only for him to be greeted with dozens of people moving around and heading towards the market. What came over him that made him drive her here and even follow her to walk the distance? Neil thought as he looked around the crowded place, with Mia already walking forward, not even waiting for him. As if just noticing he wasn't following her, she turned over her shoulder and frowned while putting her hands on her hips. "Why are you standing there? Let's go before the crowd finishes buying the fresh groceries. You have no groceries at your condo, and if I don't buy them now, I won't have any ingredients to cook with." She planned to cook for him? Neil thought to himself. He had thought she wanted to get herself something at the market, but it turned out she wanted to do grocery shopping for his house. For some reason, he liked the idea of her cooking something for him at his place. Speaking of cooking, he hadn't eaten since this morning as he had forgotten because of the investigation he was doing at Ivy Grove. He could feel his stomach growling, but he had been ignoring it. He hadn't been taking the nutrition pills again after the side effects that made him vulnerable, nor was he eating properly. Despite the fact that Neil liked the idea of eating another meal cooked by her, he wasn't going to go against his own principles and go grocery shopping with a woman at a local market filled with dozens of people. He had never in his life escorted anybody to shop for anything in a fancy place, not to mention a local market. And he wasn't about to break that by going with her into that place where he could already imagine the strong stench of sweat and other things that would welcome him. "Are you coming or not?" Mia, who was waiting for him, frowned when he wasn't walking towards her. She understood that he wasn't used to places like this and perhaps he had never even been to a local market before, but she could only afford a place like this as she had planned to use her own money to buy everything. Besides, the things here were fresher and better than those sold in fancy places. Neil didn't even attempt to move from his spot. He crossed his muscular arms against his chest and narrowed his eyes at the girl, who was standing a few inches away from him, and with his authoritative tone, he calmly said, "Use your short legs and walk back here, Harrison. If you want groceries, I will order them for you online. You are not going to buy anything from this place. Now start walking back to me." If she wanted groceries to cook for him, she should have just told him and he would get them ordered, but she had made him walk with her all this way when he had better things to attend to today. Today was Friday, and he only had 2 days to prepare his soldiers for their Monday mission at Ivy Grove. Mia pursed her lips as she glanced down to look at her legs. She would only be considered short while standing next to him, as he was so tall she had to tilt her head to meet his gaze, but compared to other women, she was taller than an average woman. "I don't have short legs, and I'm not leaving this place until I get the things I want. If you don't want to come along, then fine. Go and sit in your car, and I will find you once I am done with my shopping," Mia said with a huff. She knew her way around, and it would even be better if she were to go alone rather than take this arrogant man with her. She hadn't even asked him to follow her in the first place. He was the one who got out of his car and began to follow her, and she had assumed he wanted to go. Not paying him any more attention, Mia turned on her heels and began to walk away. Neil frowned at her audacity to walk away from him when he had told her to walk back. He ordered her to stop, but she acted like he wasn't even talking to her and raised her hand to make a shooing gesture for him to leave her alone. If only this girl knew how many men he had slain for disrespecting him, she wouldn't have the audacity to always disobey his commands. She was probably the only person who got away with not taking his words seriously. "The audacity of you, little girl," he muttered under his breath and also started to walk forward. If he had to drag her back to the car, he would do it just so she would learn to listen to him the next time he ordered her to do something. However, Neil did no such thing as he saw how she was happily buying things from several stall owners. She stood before a stall filled with fresh tomatoes and other goods. Her smile was bright as the morning sun as she picked the things she needed while speaking to the elderly man behind the stall. It was also at this moment that he realized the local market wasn't as bad as he had thought. Vibrant colors and lively chatters surrounded the place. Stall owners enthusiastically showcased their diverse array of goods, from fresh produce to handmade crafts. Even the air was filled with enticing aromas, blending the scent of spices, baked goods, and exotic fruits. As he was looking around, his eyes fell on a strange-looking fruit that looked inviting, and without hesitation, Neil found himself walking towards the stall. He looked closely at the fruit and noticed it was something he had never seen or eaten. Neil preferred fruit over other foods while he was at camp. He had already tried most fruits on Earth, but he had never seen this particular red, almond-shaped fruit before. It piqued his curiosity with its foreign and mysterious appearance. "Give me one of these," Neil said as he took out his wallet and handed the middle-aged man, who had been watching him admire the fruit, the money. The man hesitated, saying, "Sir, these fruits are for," before Neil interrupted him. "Are you selling them or not?" Neil questioned coldly, not in the mood to listen to any sales pitch. He simply wanted to taste the intriguing and delicious-looking fruit. He was only curious and not in the mood for conversation. He knew full well how market people could be chatty to their customers, but he wasn't that customer. Seeing the no-nonsense look in Neil's eyes, the fruit seller quietly handed him one of the fruits and took the money. As Neil washed the fruit and took a bite, the seller hoped that his customer knew what he was buying and the purpose of the fruit. Not bad, Neil thought as he finished eating the fruit and flung the seed away. He then walked towards Mia, who had just finished buying goods from the stall she had been standing at. Mia, who had thought her professor had returned to his car, was surprised to turn around only to collide with his firm form. She had almost lost her balance, but she felt his strong arm wrapped around her waist to keep her from falling. Her cheeks heated up at the way his hand grabbed her waist. He pulled her to stand straight. "Such a clumsy girl you are, Harrison." He released her slim waist while using his finger to flick her forehead. "OWW, that hurt." She rubbed her forehead while glaring up at him. She hadn't thought he would follow her. "Why do you always call me by my last name instead of my first name?" she asked as she curiously looked up at him. She had noticed that he had never addressed her by her name. "Because I want to," he replied curtly while rolling up his shirt sleeves to his elbow, revealing his toned forearms where the snake tattoo on his right forearm was showing. He didn't stop there and also unbuttoned the top buttons of his shirt. Mia's innocent eyes subconsciously followed all of his actions, and her face slightly turned red as she caught a glimpse of his chest. He then ran his fingers through his hair as he gritted his teeth. "Why is the weather so f***ing hot today?" he muttered to himself in annoyance. He wiped the sweat from his brow as he felt the sun had suddenly seemed to burn. His heart rate increased as a wave of warmth spread inside him, making him feel uncomfortable. He wasn't the kind to tolerate heat in any way, as it always ruined his mood. However, this heat felt different. Even the air hung heavy with humidity, making his every breath feel like a laborious take. What was wrong with him? Neil thought as he felt his body begin to feel funny from the inside. "Are you all right?" Mia questioned with concern in her voice as she noticed how red his face was turning under the sun. He looked like he was about to throw up anytime soon. He nodded his head and hummed, She doubted that because he seemed to be finding it hard to even speak. Though the weather was hot, it wasn't that unbearable to Mia, who was already used to being at the market on a sunny day. Mia looked around. She knew a place where they sold cold refreshments. Perhaps that would help him. "Hold this for me. I will get you something cold." She handed him the 2 grocery bags in her hand, and he took them from her without a word while she ran in the opposite direction to go and get him the cold drinks. Not long after, Mia returned with 4 cold cans of Coke. She found him sitting at one of the chairs in front of the stall they had been standing at minutes ago. He was looking down while still holding the bags she'd given him like an obedient child waiting for his mother to return. If only he would remain like this, obedient and easygoing, but she knew he was only like this because he wasn't feeling well. Mia thought as she approached him and opened one of the Coke cans and put a straw in it before handing it to him. "Here, have this. It might help with the heat." He looked up at her from where he was sitting, his gray eyes appearing even darker and intimidating, and without a word, he moved his head forward and took the straw into his mouth and began to drink the cold Coke from her hand without taking his eyes from her face. Mia noticed how he was drinking the Coke like it was his life source, and she couldn't help but flush under his intense gaze that locked her in place. Why was he staring at her like that? It almost felt like she was prey and he was the predator, keeping her in place as he feasted on his first meal before he would get back to her. Mia swallowed hard. Even the way he was sucking the drink through the straw was provocative enough to make her throat go dry and cause her mind to go blank for a moment. Does he have to suck the straw like that while giving her that look? Mia thought in distress as her hand shook. She would have given him to hold his drink by himself, but he was still holding on to the bags she'd given him earlier. She might as well drop the drink if he didn't stop looking at her like that while sucking the straw like he was sucking something else. Even the people in the market couldn't help but notice the two. To the people, the two looked like a couple who had come to shop together, with the husband holding the bags while the wife fed him the drinks as he looked tired. Though Mia thought the look he was giving her was intimidating, to the market people who were stealing glances at the couple, it appeared to them that the husband was lovingly looking at his wife as she fed him. Such a cute couple. It was rare to find couples shopping together these days, and the elderly people couldn't help but admire them. Unknown to them that the look Neil was giving Mia was far from loving. He was silently accusing her in his mind for being the reason he was burning from the inside with a strange lust and a sudden strong desire to have her in his bed at his house. Chapter 78. Forbidden Fruit. Only after drinking 3 of the cold cans of Coke did Neil get up from his sitting position. However, he still wasn't feeling all good from the inside. He was burning with the sudden desire to have a woman nestled underneath him. He was someone who'd never let his manly needs cloud his mind. He knew how to control his lust and had days where he got pleasure from the women he paid to give him, who he didn't even know their names. However, at this moment, he could barely control himself from the crazy desire that was beginning to make him act unlike himself. He didn't have to wonder further to realize what was making him feel this way. It was the darn fruit he bought from that man. Was it a fruit with an aphrodisiac? That could only be the case because he wouldn't be feeling like this if it wasn't an aphrodisiac. But why didn't the man warn him of it? Instead of telling him that what he was buying wasn't a normal fruit, he had watched him eat the fruit right there and then. He would strangle that man if he saw him again. Because of Neil's clouded and unfocused mind, he didn't realize Mia had turned him into someone she was ordering around to carry the bags as she continued to buy her groceries while slowly sipping the last cold drink in her hand. While carrying 4 bags in his hands, all Neil could think about was how Mia's lips were sipping from her straw. The more he looked at her lips, the more he found them inviting. The urge to pull her into his arms and crush his mouth on hers was so strong he couldn't think straight. He was so aroused he could feel his trousers beginning to tighten as his little brother down there was getting hard. FK. He closed his eyes and opened them again to calm his mind. Not to draw any attention to himself, Neil used the bags in his hands to block the front of his trousers that were beginning to bulge out. In all his life, he had never experienced this heightened form of desire, and it was all because of this girl. If she had simply listened to him and went back, he wouldn't have eaten that forbidden fruit. "Aren't you done yet?" he asked with an irritated voice. They had been walking around without any destination, and she was currently leading him towards a corner that wasn't as crowded as the other places. However, despite his irrational tone, Mia merely smiled at him and said, "Nope, I need to buy some seafood right there. I'm almost done." Mia, who didn't know that her professor had eaten a forbidden fruit, noticed how flushed his face looked with beads of sweat glistening on his forehead and thought it was because of the sun. She suddenly felt sorry for him. Poor thing, he wasn't used to walking around the market. Mia removed her handkerchief from her pocket and raised her hand, attempting to wipe his sweaty forehead, but he took a step back, creating distance between them, making her frown. "What do you think you're doing?" Neil asked as she moved towards him again with the handkerchief. He didn't want her to get close to him before he would lose control of himself and do something he would regret later. Mia pursed her lips. "Stop moving back, let me wipe your sweat." Neil reluctantly stood still, allowing her to approach him with the handkerchief as he could also feel the sweat dripping from his own forehead, but because of the bags, he couldn't wipe them off. He noticed as she stood on the tip of her toes, her eyes focused on wiping the sweat from his forehead. His heightened senses caught the subtle movements of her hand against his forehead. She was standing so close to him he could perceive her flowery scent. He looked down and noticed how she was biting down on her bottom lip. This stupid girl was going to be the death of him today. As Mia wiped his forehead and face, Neil couldn't help but feel a strange tension in the air. Their eyes locked, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. It was like they were the only ones in the market, and everyone blurred away. Unknowingly, his eyes trailed down to her lips again. Mia, who noticed how his eyes were glued to her lips, held her breath as his head slowly began to lean down, creating an anticipation that hung in the air and in her heart that had quickened its pace. Her hand, which was still held up with her handkerchief, slowly fell back down as she watched his head continued to move toward her. Mia, caught in the moment, closed her eyes instinctively. However, when she didn't feel anything, she opened them after a second. She was surprised to find Neil leaning down not towards her, but to take a sip from the straw of her cold drink. Her eyes widened slightly and her face flushed in embarrassment at the unexpected turn of events. What was she thinking? That he was going to kiss her? Ha! How stupid of her to even think someone like this man would fancy her to that level when even the normal men in Whispering Way didn't fancy her. Wait, what was he even doing drinking from the same straw she had been sipping from? Mia thought as she looked down at his bent head as he continued to suck her straw until the drink was empty. Neil finished drinking and stepped back, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Hurry up and finish your shopping, Harrison," he said with a hint of dark amusement in his voice, leaving her slightly flustered. Mia, still processing the unexpected twist, stammered, yeah, I'll be quick." She watched as Neil walked away, his expression unreadable. However, both of them were completely unaware of a man that had been following them while pretending to buy fish, but was secretly taking their pictures. As he watched them approach, he looked away while smiling happily at the good shot of the pictures he had taken. His boss was going to be very happy with his shots. Back at Whispering Way Street, in the apartment where Mia lived, Owen was seen packing his most important items into a backpack. Though he knew he wouldn't be needing any of the stuff he was packing, he needed to camouflage as he had told everyone he knew that he was traveling to a relative's place in another country for a better life. Yeah, he was leaving for a better life, and when he would show up again in Whispering Way, he would take them all by surprise, especially Mia Harrison, who had broken his heart and made him realize he wasn't the good guy in her story, and he would never be the good guy he had thought he wanted to be because of her. He had never been good anyway, so it was time he made a living out of being the bad guy. He had already finalized everything with the organization he would be working with this morning. They had given him a new place he would be staying before he would meet their boss on Sunday, where he was told they would plan for their next shipment. He wasn't afraid of what he was getting himself into because he had done worse as a boy. He had done things beyond his own imagination now that he thought about it, but he had thought he would never get back to such a life again because he had Mia Harrison in his life, the innocent girl who made him overcome his dark side as a boy. However, it seemed only that dark life would allow him to have her as his. Owen picked up his backpack and glanced around the room he had lived in for the past 26 years, the room that held his tears, disappointment, and pain, the room where he had hidden in a corner and cried after committing his first ever murder at the age of 12. He could still remember that day like it had just happened yesterday. He could still remember how the blood of Harry, his friend, had soaked his clothes. He had only been curious, but who would have thought a little curiosity would kill the boy? On that day, Owen had been angered by his drunken father who had whipped him for breaking his bottle of alcohol. Actually, he had broken the bottle on purpose because he wanted his father's attention, but he had gotten the beating of his life that left him feeling detached from his own body. He couldn't walk for a few hours, and when he was finally able to walk, Harry had come looking for him and invited him to take a stroll at the new warehouse that was under construction in town. When Owen was a boy, he liked to go around with a pocket knife because he believed he needed to protect himself when his boss would ask him to deliver drugs to another district. Furthermore, he had seen the adults doing it to protect themselves. Thus, he never forgot to have his own knife, but on that day in the warehouse where his friend was walking ahead of him, a dark thought had crossed his mind. What would happen if he were to use the knife to gut out his friend's chest? It was just a curious thought, and unknowingly, he had followed his curiosity. The teenage Owen had walked behind his friend and wrapped an arm around his neck from behind before using the knife to swiftly jab his chest and twist it inside his heart. His fragile heart had burst immediately with blood oozing out like a broken tap. Within minutes, Harry had died in front of Owen. He had been so scared he peed his pants, but after he recovered from his shock, he had acted smartly and pulled the body to a secluded place, got rid of the knife, then rushed home and cried. Owen stared at the corner of the room where he had cried that afternoon. He could still picture his teenage self sitting there and shaking before an idea had come into his mind. He didn't want to go to prison for killing someone, so he took a shower and got rid of his bloody clothes by burning them in the fireplace before he wore a fresh set of clothes and went to Harry's house. He asked his friend's mother about her son, and she told him he went out an hour ago. Owen had then said he would wait for Harry to return, and the clueless woman had invited him into her son's room and even gave him lunch to eat while waiting for Harry, unknown to her that she was feeding her child's murderer. A sound from outside snapped Owen back to the present. He then glanced at the letter he had written down for Mia. He would give it to Elizabeth to deliver it to her daughter when she was back. He wouldn't want to meet her in person when he wasn't yet the man she wanted. He would be back for her when he had gotten everything right, and once he returned, he would be wealthy and powerful enough to deal with Xavier Galvera, who he had just found out was responsible for his expelling from his university. Not just Xavier, but also the gray-eyed man who had dared to touch his Mia. Some people were just never meant for goodness, and Owen was one of those people. He was never born for goodness. His soul was already woven with the threads of darkness the day he killed his best friend. Chapter 79. Burning Inside. The sun shone brightly against the cityscape of Zen, descending its scorching heat upon the earth. The hotter the weather got, the more certain someone suffered from trying to control the burning desire that had been making his mood sour because he couldn't quench his needs. Neil regretted even driving the girl to the market because if he hadn't gone there, he wouldn't have had the situation where he would let his curiosity get the best of him and make him buy an unknown fruit that had now messed up not just his body, but his mind as well. And to make matters worse, the girl in his car kept trying to make him talk about Xavier Galvera as he rode back to his condo. If only she would just shut up and let him suffer quietly until he reached his condo, but Mia Harrison seemed to be getting so used to his presence to the extent she wasn't sensing his growing irrational mood. The more he was aware of her, the more he wanted to stop the car and take her in his car until the burning desire in his groin subsided. Mia, who wasn't even paying attention to his mood as she was busy trying to make him share some information about his meeting with Xavier Galvera, finally noticed how his grip on the steering wheel tightened to the extent his knuckles were turning white. She then glanced at his side profile and saw how his sharp jaw was clenched tightly. He hadn't spoken much after he had drunk from the same straw she had been sipping from in the market. He had only followed her while silently holding the grocery bags with a blank expression. She was grateful he hadn't spoken though, as she had been so embarrassed for her silly action of assuming he was going to kiss her when all he did was drink her Coke from the same straw, which was an intimate action, but then she didn't comment on it. Nonetheless, when they got into the car and she forgot to fasten her seatbelt, he had nonchalantly reminded her without even looking at her. She had then started to fish for information, but the only reply she received from him was a hum to when she asked him if he was the one that told Xavier Galvera about her scholarship. However, now that she noticed, he was growing annoyed and his face appeared abnormally red with beads of sweat glistening on his forehead. He looked like someone running a high fever. Mia cleared her throat and was about to ask if he was all right, but before she could even open her mouth to speak, he beat her to it. His deep voice sounded husky and dangerous as he coldly said, "Another word from that pretty little mouth of yours, young lady." There was a dark threat in his tone as he added, "One more word and I will make sure your mouth, that doesn't know when to shut up, will get busy doing something else. Now, shut the FK up until I ask you to speak." He warned with a calm, aloof voice that made Mia immediately seal her lips. However, she couldn't help but wonder what she had done or said to annoy him this much. What did he even mean by he would make sure her mouth gets busy doing something else? What could he possibly make her mouth do apart from talking? She thought to herself with pursed lips, but she didn't dare to ask what he meant for the fear of him making her do something outrageous. He was a moody person. It was better not to pester him any more than she had done for the day. Through the entire ride to his condo, Mia remained quiet and tried to make herself as invisible as possible in her seat. As he drove into the underground parking lot, he swiftly got out of the car, went straight to the car's trunk and opened it for her to take out the grocery bags. But this time he didn't move to help her carry any of the bags, as even when they were at the market, he had subconsciously carried all the bags for her because of his disrupted mind. As Mia moved in front of him to carry the bags from the trunk, his heightened senses made him aware of her again. His throat went dry as his eyes fell on her exposed neck when she stood next to him. She was trying to tie her hair in a ponytail so it wouldn't bother her when carrying the bags. Though her actions were completely innocent, to Neil, who was still under the influence of some unknown fruit, he found it provocative. Her beautiful swan neck was on display in his view as she tied her hair. He found himself momentarily looking downward towards her collarbone and the swell of her bosom that were prominent from the blue t-shirt she wore because of how her hands were up behind her head. He could even make out their shape despite the fabric, and he could tell how soft they were, as he had felt one of them against his hand when he had mistakenly touched her today. The more he looked, the more his trousers tightened and he started to get hard. She was unknowingly torturing the soul out of him. In all of his freaking life, he never held himself back from getting what he desired and wanted, nor had he had a situation where he would lust over any female like a beast. He could hear a voice in his head telling him to pull her back into the car and run his hand against her soft bosom until she arched towards his hardened groin and begged him to do the crazy things that were running through his head to her. He wanted to kiss those little lips until she forgot how to speak. He wanted, damn. Neil closed his eyes and clenched his fists to control the beast that was trying to make him follow his desires. And when he opened his eyes, he realized she was still struggling to tie her hair, and without a second thought, he raised his hand and pulled the hair down, and the long, thick brown strands of hair came pouring down her shoulder and covering down to her chest. Neil noticed the glare she shot at him for pulling down the hair she had been struggling to tie, and before she could speak, he nonchalantly said, "You are taking forever on tying the hair. Take 2 of the bags and I will carry the rest. I hate it when people waste my time. Here, take this." He bent down and handed her 2 of the bags so she wouldn't do anything to drive his mind crazy again with her innocent action. Mia, who still had no idea what was going on, tucked a strand of hair that was falling over her face behind her ear before she took the bags he handed her without a word, as it seemed he didn't want her to speak. She had wanted to tie her hair because she didn't want it falling over her face while carrying all of the 6 bags, but since he had offered to carry the rest, she simply moved aside for him to carry them while she waited for him to press the lock button on his key. Then, without even glancing at her direction, he began to walk ahead of her towards the elevator in the underground parking lot. What was wrong with him? He was walking so fast she had to run a little to catch up to the closing elevator door that was sliding close because he had walked inside ahead of her and not even bothering to hold up the sliding door for her. She walked into the elevator and was about to complain, but seeing his hardened expression from the reflective walls of the elevator, she swallowed her words as she suddenly felt a slight shiver down her spine when she met his gray eyes that were glaring at her from the reflection. Even his grip on the grocery bags was so tight she could see the handles dig into his palms. What did she do wrong? Was he still angry that she didn't listen to him when he had ordered her not to go to the local market? But he had followed her there and even helped her carry the bags. His mood was so unpredictable. She couldn't help but feel wary of him again after she had started to feel comfortable in his presence. As Mia was trying to wonder what she'd done that could possibly ruin his mood, the elevator suddenly jerked, causing her to stumble towards him. Instinctively, she grabbed his waist to prevent herself from falling. As she looked at his cold expression in the reflection, she froze. Before she could react, he had already moved away from her and dusted off his shirt where she had touched him. Mia suddenly felt a pang in her heart. She was hurt by his actions. It seemed as though her touch had made him feel unclean. She had thought he considered her a friend. He had even shared her drinks and treated her differently from others in Ivy Grove, but it seemed that wasn't the case. He was repulsed by her. Perhaps Owen was right when he once told her that no man would ever like her because she didn't have anything to attract a man. He would always remind her how unattractive she was every time she complained to him about how no guy was paying attention to her like the other girls in high school. But to make her feel better, he would say, "But to me, you are the most beautiful girl I have ever seen. Don't feel bad when the men stay away from you, because I am always here with you." As a teenager, she used to feel so bad at the fact that she wasn't attractive enough to make the boys look at her more than once, but as an adult, she had learned to live with that fact and even stopped wearing dresses, opting for plain shirts and simple jeans to remain invisible. Furthermore, it had never hurt her when they called her Plain Jane in school. But at this moment, when she noticed a look like disgust in his expression, it pained her heart so much she didn't want to be here. She wanted nothing more than to return to the comfort of her own room and play her guitar. Chapter 80. In the Kitchen. Punishment. As they walked into the hallway that led to his condo, Mia hugged her midriff, with the grocery bags hanging on both her sides. She tried to remain as invisible as possible until she would be done with her work and go home. He was walking ahead of her, and she walked slowly behind him with her insecurities taking over her emotions. Unknown to her, the man in front of her was using every bit of self-control to keep himself from following his desires. He had dusted his shirt in the elevator because he felt the place where she touched him burn. He was disgusted at himself for getting easily aroused by just her mere touch. They walked in silence, the only sound echoing through the hallway being the soft click of their footsteps against the polished marble floor. Neil could sense the unusual silence from the girl behind him, but he was too annoyed with himself to care about her feelings. Finally, they reached the entrance of his condo. He swiftly typed in his complicated password, his long fingers tapping the keys with speed. The door clicked and slowly swung open, revealing the cold, lavish condo that felt gloomy and empty to Mia. Despite the luxurious setting, she could never get used to such a black and gray house. The room was dim until he pressed a button on the wall, and the glass walls of the living room revealed the outside world. It reflected the bustling city of Zen bathed in the sunlight. The only thing she liked about his condo was the view from the glass walls, thought Mia as she stared at the outside through the glass wall, momentarily forgetting about the insecurities that were eating away at her heart. She hugged her midriff and watched an airplane fly across the sky above the skyscrapers of the city. The last time she came here, she hadn't noticed how beautiful the city was from the view up here. As Mia was lost in the view of the city, she didn't notice how the man behind her was staring at her figure with a slightly softened expression that betrayed his usual stoic face. She was unknowingly standing at his favorite spot where he would look out at the city to clear his mind. She looked like a fallen angel standing there, bathed in the sunlight. Though he'd noticed how she never wore dresses or makeup, she always seemed to like simple outfits, yet she looked more adorable and beautiful than those caked-faced women with heavy makeup. Neil would have liked to admire the angel standing by his window, but the effect of that damn fruit was starting to act up again in his body. The demons in him were fighting to come loose and pounce on her like a hungry beast. Fuck, he cursed under his breath, then walked away from the living room with long, angry strides that mirrored his irritation. When he entered his room, he forcefully slammed the door behind him, making Mia, who had been lost in the view outside, jump in fright at the sudden bang. She swirled around and noticed Mr. Ice Cube was nowhere in sight and immediately realized he was the one who must have slammed the door. What a temper he had, Mia thought as she bent down and began to pick up the grocery bags on the floor. She'd better start with her work and leave before sunset. It was already 5 minutes to 4. She would like to be at home by 5 p.m. so she would look for a decent dress for Monday's event, which she wasn't even excited about because she wasn't confident enough to compete with the rest. The winning requirements included beauty and intelligence. She was confident in her intelligence but not her beauty. There was nothing wrong with being average, but sometimes people made her feel insecure and self-conscious of her looks. She hadn't made many friends in high school because no one wanted to be friends with a plain Jane with high IQ. Mia had graduated high school with high grades. She used to be the top in her class and in every school activity, which was how she had gotten a scholarship in Ivy Grove. However, being intelligent wasn't enough in Ivy Grove. One had to be at least beautiful, even if you didn't fit into the class of the wealthy students. Unfortunately, she had none of the things that would make her fit into their standards. And today's experience in the elevator had made her feel even worse about herself. It reminded her of all the times she would hate to look into the mirror of her bathroom when taking a shower. When she was a teenager, her body development had started earlier than her other age mates in school. She had started her puberty at the age of 10. She recalled seeing how her breasts were growing faster than the other girls, which made her start to wear baggy shirts to hide them because of how weird she felt then. Mia dismissed all the negative thoughts from her mind so she could focus on cooking a good meal for her professor, despite his action that had hurt her and reminded her of all her insecurities. She wouldn't want to lose her job because of her silly feelings that were hurt. Besides, why was she even getting mad at him when they weren't even friends or anything? He was her professor and her employer. She was the one getting ahead of herself because of how he had helped her talk to Mr. Galvera about her scholarship. Mia, you better stop letting your crush for his eyes get over you. You are the last person on earth a man like that would fancy. You better focus on your job and stop overthinking things. You need to work and support your mother, she whispered to herself as she made her way towards the kitchen, carrying 6 of the grocery bags in both hands. Mia looked around the luxurious, clean kitchen that wasn't spared from the black and gray color. The modern black kitchen had a large island, 2 gray chairs beside it, and a wall-mounted light fixture. With sleek black wood cabinets, a black granite countertop, and a dark stainless steel sink that looked like it had never been used before. There was also a large glass window with a view of the outdoors, adding natural light to the dark-themed space. And as Mia admired the kitchen, she couldn't help but think that Mr. Ice Cube was a sucker for dark colors. It seemed like he had never used any of his kitchen equipment, as she began to pull out the pans and pots. All the cooking equipment was still wrapped in its sealed package, which meant it was recently bought. When Mia walked towards the bin to throw away the wraps, she saw used coffee mugs and plates inside the bin along with a few spoons. What the heck? She thought in disbelief as she looked down at the bin with her lips tightly pressed together in displeasure. So he disposed of his used plates instead of washing them. No wonder the sink looked like it had never been used before. It was because he had never used it or anything in this kitchen. Such a wastrel he was. Mia thought as she bent down and brought out the plates and seemingly expensive mugs from the clean bin. Perhaps it was because of how she was raised by her mother and taught to never waste things, but thinking about how much more of these plates he had wasted instead of washing them made her feel annoyed. He should be spanked and punished for being such a lazy hygiene freak. Mia thought as she washed the dishes and put them away, while wishing she could punish the man like how her mother would punish her as a child whenever she wasted her food or anything useful. But then who would dare punish that ice cube of a man? Nobody. As Mia was silently cursing Neil for being a wastrel in the kitchen, the latter was in his gloomy, dark-themed bathroom, standing under the freezing cold shower, which he had set to the coldest. As his bathroom was surrounded with high-tech equipment, he could set his shower to ice-cold water that was as cold as being outside in winter. As the freezing water descended on his heated body, he closed his eyes to let it seep into his mind and soul. The water was so cold to the extent cold fog emitted from his body as if he was using hot water. Neil stood under the shower until he felt his bones and his teeth chattering together in cold. He turned off the shower and wrapped his lower body in a black towel, then took another towel to wipe his dripping wet hair. It had been long since he had to bathe with cold water to suppress his desires. He couldn't even remember the last time he was aroused like this, because he had gone to live in seclusion 2 years ago on his island, but Mia Harrison was making him go out of his mind ever since the day he had taken a short nap with her on his bed. He had felt something similar then, and had to shower with cold water, and today was even worse. He stepped out of his bathroom at the same time he heard his phone ringing on the bed where he had thrown it when he rushed into the room. He frowned as he picked up the phone and saw it was a text message. Reading the text message, he raised his eyebrows in realization. Then, he began to look for Mia's contact number on his phone. Finding it, he typed down a few messages before he sent them to her. Though she was in his house at the moment, he didn't want to look at her again until he was sure he wouldn't lust over any of her innocent actions. Does she even have any idea how much she had punished him for the whole day?